been pretty much common knowledge that Paul Manafort, Donald Trump's on and off and then on again campaign manager, who was brought in because he was technically a political professional as opposed to the rank amateur, and misogynist Corey Lewandowski. But, of course, Paul Manafort had shady connections with the Kremlin, the Russian mob, Vladimir Putin, pardon the redundancy. And that's been pretty much common knowledge, but, it's one of those things where with any left-wing candidacy, shady connections are just part of the game. You can't get away from it. They can get away with it, and they do. I mean, look at La Clinton Ostra, for crying out loud. Well, the jig just may be up for Paul Manafort because rumor and reputation has now become substantiated and corroborated reality. And it started coming to a head yesterday. Here's the first headline I want to share with you. Trump team rushes to defend and cover Paul Manafort from scrutiny. Susan Wright at Red State. Yeah, I wonder why they would want to. They tried. Let's just put it this way. They tried to defend and cover Paul Manafort from scrutiny. Because, of course, the crooked stick together. Snitches get stitches, y'all. Here's a quote from Politico. The Donald Trump campaign defended its embattled chairman, Paul Manafort, on Tuesday, pushing back against reports that the former consultant had received secret cash payments from a deposed pro-Russian Ukrainian leader with close ties to the Kremlin, while being careful to distance Manafort from any possible wrongdoing by the candidate himself. Manafort's connections to Viktor Yanukovych, the pro-Russian former president of Ukraine, won't hurt Trump's campaign, allegedly. When you see where this ends up, you'll know that's exactly what they're concerned about. Of course, it's not like Trump's campaign could be hurt any more than Trump himself has already blown it out of the water, but I digress. Supposedly won't hurt Trump's campaign, vice presidential candidate Mike Pence said Tuesday, because he's not running for president. Well, yeah, I guess Manafort's presidential candidacy is doomed. Oh, but Trump's is still strong. Yeah, right. No, Manafort isn't running for president. He's just a shadowy figure behind the candidate pulling the strings. Oh, boy, that's right. Nobody controls Trump. Which means that Trump is as corrupt, if not more so, than Paul Manafort is, which is why the real reason why Trump brought Manafort in to begin with. But to the point, if those who are in the inner circle of a presidential campaign have no influence on the candidate, then there is no reason for them to be there. What we know, however, is that it's not how it works. That's not how it works. As undisciplined as Trump is, those he has chosen to work the closest with, like Manafort, do have an influence on it. The question now becomes, who has an influence on Manafort? A New York Times report published on Sunday detailed secret ledgers discovered in Ukraine showing more than $12 million earmarked for Manafort, who was a consultant for the Yanukovych's pro-Russian party before joining the Manhattan Millionaires campaign. Yes, that's right, I said millionaire with an M, because there's no proof he's a billionaire. Manafort denied that he ever received the cash payments outlined in the ledger and attacked the story as part of the newspaper's political agenda. Wah, wah, wah. Bleat, bitch, moan, and complain about the media. We talked about that in this morning's video. The Times report raised new questions about Trump's foreign policy rhetoric toward Moscow, such as Trump saying he might recognize Russia's conquest of the Crimean Peninsula. They just took it from Ukraine. Blatant violation of international law. He might recognize it. Gee, I wonder where that influence comes from. Pulling out of NATO. Yeah, that would definitely help the Russians, now wouldn't it? Boy, I tell you, John Adams' words about only a moral and righteous and Judeo-Christian people can keep a republic. And look at what we're looking at with this election. Two of the most corrupt and authoritarian candidates for president of the United States in American history. You know, this is what we've come, and like they say, politics is downstream from culture. The culture decays, the politics is going to follow suit. Anyway, the Times report raised new questions about Trump's foreign policy rhetoric toward Moscow, which often departs sharply from Republican orthodoxy, departs sharply from American orthodoxy and interests, and from that of previous GOP presidential nominees, who, of course, were actually Republicans. Trump has lavished praise on Russian President Vladimir Putin and said that he might be willing to, here we go, officially recognize Russia's annexation of Crimea. His critics have also alleged that the Trump campaign softened a portion of the GOP platform. This wasn't an allegation. They did. This happened. Softened a portion of the GOP platform that originally called for arming the Ukrainian government with lethal weaponry. Yeah, like with non-lethal. Why non-lethal weaponry? The Russians aren't using non-lethal weaponry. It's kind of, I hate redundant phrases like that. Lethal weaponry. Well, yeah, aren't weapons supposed to be lethal usually? Trump has also broached the subject of pulling out of NATO, something that has caused a bit of a stir among traditional Republican thinkers. All of this could likely be just Trump's vast well of inexperience talking, but when you add what we know about Manafort and his connections to the mix, it becomes a bit more complicated in terms of extricating those ties from the equation. Too late now. Pence went on to point out Hillary Clinton's latest revelations of crooked dealings, which are A, true, and B, a good point, but C, have no effect or bearing whatsoever on Trump's crooked dealings. So what's your point? Both candidates are crooked. Everybody sucks 2016. None of the above. This is not complicated. It's hard for me to understand, Cuck Pence said, is how a week ago documented information came out to demonstrate that wealthy foreign donors who made major contributions to the Clinton Foundation, who were apparently then given access to the state commissariat, has gotten such little attention, he said. Well, it's because your running mate opened his big fat mouth and said something stupid. This is not complicated either. I think it would be very important that the public have the ability to know and understand the extent to which this ultimately was a pay-to-play arrangement. Yeah, it would. So why don't you get your running mate to keep his mouth shut and stop drawing attention away from Hillary Clinton's scandals? Sound like a plan? Now, Hillary is corrupt beyond measure. Nobody is denying that. Nobody could deny it. However, well, Clintonoids do, of course, but certainly not convincingly. Not by this time. However, Trump is not content to sit back and let Mrs. Clinton hang herself. Whenever there is something that could potentially sink his opponent, he rushes to save her by saying or doing something outrageous and inappropriate. It is kind of a pattern by now. I mean, doesn't that strike any of you Trump supporters as odd that your candidate invariably goes out of his way to come to Mrs. Clinton's public relations rescue? Again, Occam's razor suggests it isn't an accident. Although his impulsiveness and stupidity certainly provide a plausible alternative explanation, and it's probably some combination of the two. I hope someone is keeping a running tally on how many incidents of corruption or gaffes can be revealed from either side so we can compare them in generations to come. Maybe our grandchildren can figure out what went wrong in 2016. This brings us to this morning when Paul Manafort's defenses essentially collapsed. The you-know-what hit the fan, in other words, to use an appropriate metaphor. Here's the headline. Susan Wright at Red State again. More Manafort, Trump chairman involved with linking Ukrainian payments to D.C. lobbyists. You know, it's like all of a sudden it's just like an implosion, basically. Now, just how entrenched with foreign governments and Democrats is Donald Trump's campaign chairman, Paul Manafort? I won't add the prefix that should be in there to make it completely accurate, but we'll get there before this video is over. Question 2 would be, is this shakeup in Trump's organization an attempt to derail the questions about those foreign ties? Well, in the words of Bugs Bunny, yeah, could be. Now, I'm speculating here, but Politico has raised a curious story about Manafort's practices that add fuel to that particular fire. Quote, Donald Trump's campaign chairman helped a pro-Russian governing party in Ukraine secretly route at least $2.2 million in payments to two prominent Washington lobbying firms in 2012, and did so in a way that effectively obscured the foreign political party's efforts to influence U.S. policy. Under federal law, U.S. lobbyists must declare publicly if they represent foreign leaders or their political parties and provide detailed reports about their actions to the Injustice, Revenge, and Cover-Up Commissariat, the Justice Department. A violation is a felony and can result in up to 5 years in prison and a fine of up to $250,000. So now Paul Manafort is looking at the possibility of jail time unless his candidate can somehow get elected, after which you can count on a pardon being issued by a President Trump. Of course, there will never be any such thing as a President Trump. And if Trump supporters would be honest with themselves first and foremost, they admit that how badly they screwed up. Now, Manafort was working with Rick Gates at that time. Gates is another, ta-da, strategist with Team Trump. Or the Trump train.
Come on! Nice and easy! Don't look down! That's it! You're doing fine!
Together, Manafort and Gates worked for Viktor Yanukovych's political party during the time that Yanukovych was president of Ukraine. Gates helped direct the work of a nonprofit that was very much pro-Yanukovych and put them in contact with Washington lobbying firms, Mercury, LLC, and ta-da! The Podesta Group, headed by none other than the brother of Hillary Clinton's campaign manager, John Podesta. Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton are not running against each other. They're two sides of the same coin. They're two heads of Hydra. You remember Hydra? Captain America, the first Avenger. Cut off one head, two more shall take its place. Hail Hydra. We got Hydra guaranteed to control the United States government after this election, folks. That's... Oh, man. How did this happen? How did this happen, Trumplicans? What came over you? Gates helped... Okay, so here's resuming the Politico quote. The nonprofit, the newly created European Center for a Modern Ukraine, is governed by a board that initially included parliament members from Yanukovych's party, conveniently enough. The nonprofit subsequently paid at least $2.2 million to the lobbying firms to advocate positions generally in line with those of Yanukovych's government. That lobbying included downplaying the necessity of a congressional resolution meant to pressure the Ukrainian leader to release an imprisoned political rival. Oh, just as an aside, as I just mentioned moments ago, the Podesta Group was founded and chaired by Tony Podesta, brother of John Podesta, a Democrat strategist and campaign chairman of Hillary Clinton. You gotta laugh, or you'll just you'll have nothing left to live for. Now, the head of Mercury, the other lobbying group, is Vin Weber, a former Republican congressman and a special policy advisor to Mitt Romney, who, take it for what you will, announced earlier this month that he would not be supporting Donald Trump. I hope he's got legal representation lined up. After being introduced to the lobbying firms, the European nonprofit made the Podesta Group $1.13 million paid between June 2012 and April 2014 to lobby Congress, the White House National Security Council, the State Commissariat, and other federal agencies, according to U.S. lobbying records. The nonprofit also paid $1.07 million over roughly the same period to Mercury to lobby Congress. Among other issues, Mercury opposed congressional efforts to pressure Ukraine to release one of Yanukovych's political rivals from prison. One former Podesta employee, speaking on condition of anonymity because of a non-disclosure agreement, said Gates described the nonprofit's role in an April 2012 meeting as supplying a source of money that could not be traced to the Ukrainian politicians who were paying him and Manafort. There were apparently some tensions over this arrangement in the Podesta Group, with at least one member who strongly felt the arrangement was illegal. There's a shock. It's a rather twisted and complicated matter, but it does raise a lot of questions about the comfort Manafort and Gates had with working so closely with governments that may not be cohesive with U.S. interests. A legal opinion drafted for the project for Mercury in May 2012 and obtained by the Associated Press concluded that the European Center qualified as a foreign principal under the Foreign Agents Registration Act, FARA, that said disclosure to the Injustice, Revenge, and Cover-Up Commissariat was not required. That determination was based on the nonprofit's assurances that none of its activities were directly or indirectly supervised, directed, controlled, financed, or subsidized by Ukraine's government or any of the country's political parties. In other words, they didn't have to be. You know, ever heard the expression 6 degrees of separation? But there's still a connection. That's just a technicality. They were of like mind. They knew that nonprofit, they knew what was wanted by then President of Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych. They knew. You know, it's no different than how lower-level Obama regime flunkies always seem to know just what their demigod wants, and so there's no trail directly, back to the White House, back to the Oval Office, directly connecting Barack Obama with any of his regime scandals. They know they're on the same page ideologically. Is the point? Same thing here. None of this directly points to Russia as the power behind Manafort, because that's how it was designed. But that is the case. Therefore, by association to Trump, it's just one more curious piece to a very twisted puzzle. But that just means that they did some homework and legwork on covering their tracks. The connection is unquestionably there. And finally, the dagger, delivered by Leon Wolf this morning at Red State. According to the other devastating, career-ending report that emerged this morning, Paul Manafort laid the groundwork for Russia's invasion of Crimea, the same one that Donald Trump recently said he would recognize as legitimate, even though it's in blatant violation of international law. Oh boy, do you realize who and what you are supporting, Trumplicans? You realize who and what you're supporting, Douglas V. Gibbs, America's former constitutional authority? Do you have any idea? You're still going to tell me that this is better than Hillary Clinton? They're both in on this. They're both in Vladimir Putin's back pocket and other places in direct proximity. When Trump first brought on Paul Manafort to work on his campaign, many people predicted that this would come back to bite him in the ass once the press got around to digging into Manafort's work in Ukraine, aka after the conventions. After Trump was the official Republican nominee, then all of it would come out. Hey, welcome to the desert of the real Trumplicans. You're reaping the whirlwind now, aren't you? Unexpectedly, quote unquote, now that the convention is over and Trump is definitely the nominee, the press has found some pretty... Remember the stories back in the spring about how the media was sitting on a bunch of stuff, a bunch of stories that would not be helpful to the Trump campaign? They were just lying in wait. I hesitate to call it an ambush because this is not remotely surprising. This is what they always do. For someone who complains about the media as much as Trump does, you would think that he would know how they operate. And know that this was going to come. Oh, boy. Among them comes this jaw-dropping revelation from the Times of London. Quote, Donald Trump's campaign chief sabotaged U.S. interests in Ukraine and encouraged Russian nationalism in Crimea. A prosecutor investigating the Republican strategist alleges in a damning memo written last year. Last year. They'd just been waiting. They had this. And did you really think, Trumplicans, that they didn't and that they wouldn't spring it on your candidate now? The report leaked to the Times sets out legal options for prosecuting Mr. Manafort in Ukraine for conspiring with a criminal organization and inciting ethnic hatred and separatism. The senior Ukrainian prosecutor alleges that in 2006, Manafort orchestrated a series of anti-NATO, for all intents and purposes, anti-American, anti-Kiev protests in Crimea, led by Viktor Yanukovych's pro-Russian Party of Regions, now designated a criminal organization. The protests forced planned NATO exercises there to be canceled. No charges were pursued because of a lack of evidence after Crimea was annexed. So in other words, the Russians deep-sixed the evidence. Manafort did not respond to a request for comment. Gee, that's a shock. The memo says, quote, it was his political effort to raise the prestige of Yanukovych and his party. The confrontation and division of society on ethnic and linguistic grounds is his trick from the time of the elections in Angola and in the Philippines. While I was in the Crimea, I constantly saw evidence suggesting that Paul Manafort considered autonomy from Ukraine as a tool to enhance the reputation of Yanukovych and win over the local electorate. Yanukovych laid the groundwork for Russia's annexation of the peninsula, which Trump has now suggested he would recognize. Trumplicans, you are supporting a gangster. You are supporting, for all intents and purposes, a member of the Russian mafia. That's what Donald Trump is, among many other unsavory things. Get it? Do you get it? Manafort spent years in Ukraine helping to create the political pretext for Russia's invasion of Crimea, which was condemned by the whole world. You know, back during the Cold War, which I'm old enough to remember, I remember wondering how Russia would conquer the United States. Now, I was back in the Cold War context. You know, will Russians get the strategic nuclear drop on us, or will they invade, or will they attack Europe, or how exactly they would go about conquering us? I never imagined that someday it would be by trying to elect a president who is an agent of a foreign power. Something that could have been vetted, but never was. And plus, I never thought, I figured that agent of a foreign power would be Barack Obama. Now it's Donald Trump, the Republican presidential nominee. Of course, you know, he's got two to choose from. He's got Hillary on the payroll too. So, I mean, whoever wins in November, Putin definitely is going to win. He wins either way. He controls Hillary, he controls Trump. You want to know who controls Trump? Vladimir Putin. This is unbelievable. 3 weeks ago, Trump stunned the world by suggesting he might recognize Russia's annexation of Crimea officially. An especially bizarre move, given that the press was openly suggesting that the Russians hacked the DNC in order to aid his campaign at the time. Yeah, now suddenly this makes a lot more sense, doesn't it? Jesus, I can't believe this. If Donald Trump has any interest in reassuring people that he is not, in fact, an unwitting or witting, Occam's razor says witting, stooge of the Kremlin, he should really get busy on doing that soon rather than continuing to make the problem worse. But of course, Donald Trump is not capable of not making any problem worse. Now is he? Now, you know how Trump campaign damage control works. Their version of it. They don't try to control it, they double down. Trump always doubles down. His campaign always doubles down. They always get defiant, or he's a counterpuncher. So even when counterpunching is not the way to go, sometimes retreat is an option, but not Trump. Except this time. Jesus. They didn't even try to double down. Defiantly, Trump didn't defiantly stand behind his campaign manager, give him a vote of confidence, which would have been the kiss of death. He didn't even bother with that much. Manafort's out. He's gone. This didn't even last 12 hours, much less 24. Just like that. Gone. Manafort is history. And amazingly enough, Trump didn't bring back Corey Lewandowski. Because remember, they were going back and forth. Lewandowski was a campaign manager, and then it was Manafort, and then it went back to Lewandowski, and then it was Manafort. Now Manafort is off to a Ukrainian prison eventually. And so now who has Trump brought in to captain his sinking ship? Well, here's the headline that pretty much answers that question. At Red State, Leon Wolf concludes this rapid-fire series of breaking events. Trump once again mistakes flattery for competence, hires Trump Bart News' Stephen Bannon as campaign chief executive, manager, or whatever. I mean, isn't Trump the chief executive of his own campaign? Whatever. I mean, not even. Doesn't matter. As has been remarked before, Trump's judges of people's character and competence solely, or Trump judges people's character and competence solely by how nice they are to him. Do they kiss his ass? Do they apply oral reverse air pressure to certain parts of his anatomy? If a person flatters him, they are great at their job. If a person criticizes or challenges him, they are terrible at their job and probably are soon to get fired. This is especially true of people in the media. That's why it's not really surprising at all that Trump completed the circle he began yesterday with the hiring of now former Fox News Channel chief Roger Ailes. By the way, that's another connection to Limbaugh. Well, another way that the Limbaugh or the Trump campaign controls Rush Limbaugh. Trump apparently decided he wasn't surrounded by enough people who told him how great he was, so he added the co-founder of the other news entity that has repeated his every fantasy as fact, Trump Bart News, formerly Breitbart News. Quote, Trump announced Wednesday that pollster Kellyanne Conway was promoted to campaign manager and Stephen Bannon, the co-founder of Breitbart News, was named campaign chief executive. In other words, he created another layer above in his campaign bureaucracy above campaign manager. He stratified the organizational chart as a reward to Bannon. I wonder, does Bannon have to leave Breitbart? I don't know why he would bother, and Breitbart's an arm of the Trump campaign. Anyway, I've known Steve and Kellyanne both for many years. They are extremely capable, highly qualified people who love to win and know how to win. If they love to win, why are they coming to Trump's campaign? Anyway, Trump said that in a statement. I am committed to doing whatever it takes to win this election. Oh, really? Your actions don't match your words, pal. And ultimately become president because our country cannot afford 4 more years of the failed Obama-Clinton policies which have endangered our financial and physical security. No, you have other ways and older ways of endangering our financial and physical security, like being on the Russian payroll. Being Vladimir Putin's caddy. Boy toy. You know, if you've ever met Bannon before, you know what a desperate play this truly is. Either that or a signal that he knows he's already lost and wants to reward people who helped him get this far, although bringing people that he supposedly likes onto the Trump-tanic while it's going down for the third time doesn't seem like much of a reward to me.